It's unlucky to step on lines and cracks in the sidewalk, but Mom didn't seem to understand this. On the long walk from the subway station, she kept tugging at my arm and telling me to walk straight. It had rained for most of the morning, but now in the early evening, only a light mist lay heavily in the air. The dark gray smoke from the chimneys along this Brooklyn street didn't have far to travel before blending neatly into the low night sky. We were on our way to visit with one of Mom's friends. Since it wasn't often I got a chance to be with her all by myself, I didn't mind the wet weather, or her quiet mood, or her tugging at my arm. We walked along at a quick pace. I asked a number of times if we were late, but she didn't answer me. Her usually smooth-skinned forehead was somewhat wrinkled, and her dark eyebrows were bent into a slight frown. "What's wrong, Mom?" Her answer was another tug at my arm, as I tried to avoid the next line. She released the tight grip she had on my small hand to refer to a piece of paper she had pulled from her pocket. "Are we there yet?" I asked. I looked up for her answer, but there was none. She studied the paper and then the building numbers. She re-gripped my hand and tugged again. The wet ground was beginning to make its way in through the hole in my left shoe. I felt my sock sticking to my toes as I tried wiggling and walking at the same time. She stopped suddenly and leaned down. I brushed back some hairs sticking up from the top of my head. "Now, be a good boy." "I will, Mom." That was my standard answer, whether I planned to be good or not. We climbed a short flight of worn steps bounded by 2 wrought iron handrails. We entered the old red brick building through a highly polished wooden door that squeaked as it opened. We were met in the entranceway by a small nun dressed all in white. She nodded to Mom and smiled at me as she greeted us. Her wire-rimmed eyeglasses sat at the very end of her nose. When she spoke, she looked over the top of them. "And what's your name, little fella?" she asked. "Jennings," I replied. "Why, that's a very nice name," she said, as she turned to lead us down a very dark and narrow hallway. It was so quiet and still, and the smell of burnt candle wax made me think we were in some sort of a church. Mom often took me or one of my brothers to some new church somewhere. I held tightly to Mom's warm hand. We reached the end of the hallway and 2 wooden benches with red felt cushions. "Be a good boy and wait here," the little nun said over her glasses. "Your mother and I have a few things to discuss." I nodded my head as Mom and the nun disappeared into an office and closed the door. I was about to sit on the nice felt cushions when I remembered my pants were still damp from the rain. Instead, I stood on my tiptoes and looked out through the colors of the stained glass window. I closed one eye and moved from one colored glass to the next. "Jennings!" I was jolted away from my world of pink cars and green buildings by the little nun. I turned and re-grasped Mom's hand. She looked sad and red-eyed. "What's wrong, Mom?" She shook her head and squeezed my hand as we walked back down the hall. We stopped at a door about halfway down, and the nun opened it. The room was large and blue and filled with noisy children. As we entered, all the children stopped and stared at us. Their silence made me uncomfortable. Mom leaned down to help me off with my coat, but then hugged me. She kissed my face a number of times. She took one last swipe at my cowlick. I could see the tears on her lower lids as she forced a smile. She frightened me, so I clung to her arm. "Mom, what's wrong?" She brought me close to her once again and hugged me. My coat was still only part way off when she straightened up. She gripped my shoulders to hold me off. In a husky sort of voice, she said, "I'll be right back." She turned and slipped through the open door. The nun followed, closing the door behind her. They left me in the middle of what seemed to be 1,000 staring eyes. I felt strange and tingly all over. I couldn't move. I left my coat hanging from one shoulder. The eyes kept staring while my mind raced. What's wrong with Mom? Why did she push me away from her? Where is she? Where am I?